"Buy me, cowboy!" the most beautiful Apache slave said when she saw the man at the market. The sun rose over the small frontier town, casting a golden light on the dusty streets that had already begun to fill with activity. Merchants called out their wares, cowboys led their horses to the stables, and children ran between stalls, laughing and chasing one another. The smell of fresh bread mingled with the dust and the faint scent of livestock. It was a busy morning at the town market, a place where everything from food and clothing to animals and tools could be bought and sold. For many, it was the heart of the community, a place to meet friends, make deals, or simply watch the world move by. Among the crowd, a man walked with steady steps. His name was Ethan, a cowboy known for his quiet strength and honest nature. His clothes were simple but clean, a shirt with rolled-up sleeves, sturdy boots, and a hat that shielded his eyes from the sun. He moved with confidence, not seeking attention but earning it by the way he carried himself. People who knew him trusted him, and even strangers noticed his calm and fair presence. Today he had come to the market not to buy or sell goods, but to look for news and supplies for his ranch on the edge of the plains. As Ethan walked through the busy lanes, his eyes caught something unusual. At the far end of the market, a small crowd had gathered around a group of people chained together. His heart tightened as he saw them. Women and children, their faces weary, their eyes cautious, and their bodies tense. They were captives, brought here to be sold. This was not unusual for the time, though it was cruel and unfair. Some people in the town looked at the captives as mere property, while others looked away, pretending not to notice. But Ethan could not turn his eyes away. Among the captives was a young Apache woman. Her hair was dark and long, falling over her shoulders in waves. Her eyes were sharp, observing everything around her with intelligence and caution. Despite the fear in the crowd, she stood tall, her posture proud. Her name was Nahel, though she had not spoken it to anyone here. She had been taken from her village weeks before, and the journey had been harsh. Yet she carried herself with dignity, refusing to let the chains of captivity break her spirit. The crowd murmured as people whispered about her beauty and her courage. Some traders looked at her with desire, others with greed, trying to imagine what profit they could make from her sale. But she did not look at them. Her gaze searched for someone else, someone she could trust, though she hardly knew if such a person existed in this market filled with strangers. Ethan approached the stall where the captives were displayed. He watched quietly as a few men inspected the prisoners, speaking in low tones and pointing fingers. He could see the fear in the children's eyes and the tension in the women's bodies. The sight made his chest ache. He had always believed in fairness and justice, even in a world that often ignored these values. He knew that stepping in could be dangerous. Challenging the market sellers or interfering in the sale could bring trouble, but he could not walk away. Nahel noticed him before anyone else did. Something about his calm, steady presence drew her attention. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, and in that moment, a spark of hope passed between them. She saw a man who looked different from the others, someone who might act with honor, someone who might understand her desire for freedom. Without thinking too much, she called out, her voice strong and clear, cutting through the chatter of the market. "Buy me, cowboy!" she said. The words rang out and silenced the nearby crowd for a moment. People turned their heads in surprise. Some laughed, thinking it a joke. Others frowned, annoyed at the audacity of a captive woman speaking so boldly. But Ethan's eyes widened, and he felt the weight of her words. They were not just words. They were a plea, a challenge, and a request all at once. In them he felt the pain of captivity, the longing for freedom, and the strength of a woman who refused to give up her spirit. He stepped closer to the stall, studying her face. He saw fear and courage mixed together, the kind of strength that comes from surviving terrible circumstances. The market seller noticed his attention and raised an eyebrow. "You interested in this one, cowboy?" he asked, his tone sharp.
"She's expensive." Ethan did not answer immediately.
He weighed his options carefully, knowing that helping her could bring consequences. Yet something inside him refused to ignore her. Finally, he nodded.
"I'll take her," he said calmly. The seller laughed, thinking it a bargain for him.
Very well, he said, but you pay full price. No tricks. Ethan handed over the coins, counting them carefully to meet the seller's demand. The transaction was quick, and soon Nahel was free from the immediate control of the market. She looked at Ethan, a mixture of relief and cautious curiosity in her eyes. She had been through much, and though she had hoped for freedom before, it had always seemed impossible. Now, it was real. As they walked away from the market together, the noise of the crowd faded behind them. Ethan led her toward the path to his ranch, giving her space to walk beside him. Naheli observed him carefully, noticing the kindness in his eyes and the careful way he moved through the streets. She felt a cautious trust forming, though she knew it could be fragile. Freedom had a cost, and trust was something that could not be given lightly. On the way, Ethan spoke gently. "You're safe now," he said. "No one will harm you under my watch." Nahel nodded, her lips pressed together. She did not speak immediately, unsure if words could fully express what she felt. But inside, a small flame of hope began to grow. For the first time in weeks, she felt that she could breathe, that she could imagine a life beyond chains and fear. The journey back to the ranch was not long, but it was filled with silent observations. Ethan noticed the way Naheli's eyes scanned the landscape, noting details he might have overlooked. She seemed to understand the land, the plants, and the signs of animals nearby. He realized that her skills could be invaluable on the ranch, though he did not yet say so aloud. Nahel, on her part, noticed Ethan's careful attention to the path, the way he adjusted his steps to avoid unnecessary noise, and the way he moved as if he respected the land and the people who lived on it. She felt a mixture of wariness and admiration. This man was not like the others she had seen in captivity. He did not treat her as property, but as a human being with thoughts, feelings, and worth. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains, they reached the outskirts of Ethan's ranch. The wooden fence and modest buildings of the ranch came into view. Animals grazed peacefully, and the land seemed calm and open, a contrast to the crowded, noisy market they had left behind. Ethan turned to Nahel. "This is where you'll stay for now," he said. "You are free to walk where you like, and I expect you to treat this place with respect, as I do." Nahel studied the ranch carefully. It was different from anything she had known. It was open, quiet, and alive with opportunity. For the first time, she imagined a life where she could make choices for herself. She nodded, understanding the responsibility that came with freedom. That evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Ethan showed her around the ranch. He introduced her to the animals, the small garden, and the simple but sturdy home. Naheli listened and observed, learning quickly. Though she had been taken from her home and faced suffering, she had a resilience that allowed her to adapt. As night fell, they sat quietly under the stars. The air was cool, and the sounds of the ranch filled the silence, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of leaves, and the distant cry of a coyote. Ethan looked at Nahel, seeing the strength and intelligence in her eyes. She looked back, realizing that freedom was more than escape. It was a chance to rebuild, to learn, and to survive on her own terms. Though neither spoke much that night, a bond had begun to form. It was a bond of respect, of trust slowly being earned, and of shared understanding that the world was difficult, but courage and choice could shape it. In the quiet of the night, Nahel allowed herself to hope. For the first time in many weeks, she felt that she had a future, and for the first time she believed that someone could see her as more than a captive. Ethan, too, felt a sense of purpose, knowing that he had acted according to his conscience, and that he had the chance to make a real difference in someone's life. The market encounter, the bold words she had spoken, and the act of being bought for her freedom had started a new chapter for both of them. The world was still uncertain and filled with challenges. But in that moment, under the wide open sky, two people began a journey that could lead to trust, understanding, and hope. The morning after their journey from the market, the ranch was quiet and peaceful. The sun rose slowly over the wide plains, and the soft light revealed the gentle slopes, grazing cattle, and the simple wooden buildings of Ethan's homestead. Nahele woke early, as she usually did, and stepped outside. The air was fresh and cool, carrying the faint scent of grass and earth. For the first time in many weeks, she felt safe. The chains were gone. The guards were gone. And yet, her mind was not completely free. Freedom was strange. Freedom came with new responsibilities, and Naheli was determined to learn how to live it. Ethan was already awake, feeding the animals and checking the fences. He noticed her standing at the edge of the porch, quietly observing the land. He smiled gently, not wanting to startle her. "Good morning," he said softly. "Did you sleep well?" Nahel nodded. "I slept," she said, her voice calm but careful. She still measured her words, still wary of trusting anyone completely. Her experiences in captivity had taught her caution, but she also felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. She was free, and she could choose her own path. Ethan handed her a small basket of fresh eggs he had collected. "We have chores today," he said, "but I will show you how everything works. You don't need to rush. Just watch and learn."
Nale! Accepted the basket.
It was heavy in her hands, but she did not complain. Instead, she focused on balancing it and observing how he moved. Ethan showed her how to feed the chickens, how to carry water without spilling, and how to tend to the garden. She was quick to learn, noticing details he had not explained. She knew how to observe, how to adjust, and how to act without causing harm. The day passed slowly, but each moment brought new lessons. Nahel discovered the rhythm of life on the ranch, the way animals moved, the changing smells and sounds of the land, the way the wind hinted at coming weather. Ethan watched her closely, noting her skill and intelligence. He began to understand that she was not only brave, but also wise, shaped by experiences that went far beyond her years. During the afternoon, as the sun climbed high, they were interrupted by a group of neighbors who came to see the new Apache woman on Ethan's ranch. Some were curious, some were suspicious, and some were openly critical. "Why would you keep her here?" one man asked, his tone sharp. "She's not one of us."
Ethan did not answer immediately. He looked at Nahel, then back at the men.
"She is free," he said firmly, "and she will be treated with respect." That is enough. The men muttered among themselves, clearly unsure how to respond. Some were embarrassed by their own curiosity, while others reluctantly nodded. Naheli, standing tall beside Ethan, felt a small surge of pride. For the first time, she was not being treated as property or a prisoner. She was treated as a human being, capable of making her own choices. Later that day, Nahel found a quiet spot near the edge of the pasture. She sat on a flat rock and watched the sun reflect on the open land. Memories of her village and family filled her mind. She remembered her mother's voice, the songs her people sang, and the laughter of her younger siblings. She had been taken from all that, and yet, sitting there, she realized that she could honor those memories while building a new life. Freedom was not only about leaving captivity, it was about making a life worth living. Ethan found her there later, carrying a small bucket of water. "You seem lost in thought," he said gently. "I am thinking about the past," Nahel admitted. "About the people I lost, about where I came from." Ethan nodded, understanding her feelings.
It is natural, he said. The past shapes us, but it does not define what we can do next.
"You are free now. You can decide who you want to be." Nahele studied him for a moment. She had learned not to trust words easily, but his tone and manner seemed honest. There was no hint of judgment, only respect. She felt the faint beginnings of trust forming, though she knew it would take time. As the days passed, life on the ranch became routine, yet each day brought new challenges. Nahel had never worked with livestock before, yet she learned quickly how to guide the cattle, mend small fences, and carry supplies without spilling. She even began to understand the behavior of the horses, noticing the subtle signs of tension or comfort. Ethan taught her patiently, never rushing, and always encouraging her to observe, and act carefully. Nahel also shared some of her own knowledge. She taught Ethan small skills she had learned in her village, how to identify plants, track animals, and move quietly across the land. Ethan was impressed. He had not expected her to have so much wisdom. He realized that her experiences, though difficult, had made her stronger and more capable than most people he knew. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat by the small creek near the ranch. The water moved gently over smooth stones, and the air was cool with the promise of night. Ethan asked about her life before she was taken captive. Nahel spoke cautiously but honestly. She told him about her village, the traditions of her people, and the harsh realities they faced. She did not exaggerate or dramatize, but she spoke with quiet dignity. Ethan listened intently, feeling a mix of sadness and admiration. Sadness for what she had lost, and admiration for the courage she showed in surviving it. "You are strong," he said quietly. "Stronger than most people I know. You survived what many could not." Nahel looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "I had to," she said. "Survival is the only choice we have sometimes. And hope keeps us moving forward."
Ethan nodded. "Then we will make sure hope continues."
"You will not be alone here." As the days turned into weeks, their bond grew slowly. It was built on small gestures, sharing food, working together, learning from each other, and respecting boundaries. Nahel began to trust Ethan, though not blindly. She saw that he treated her as an equal, not as a possession, and that respect was something he valued deeply. The ranch itself also began to change. Animals thrived under their care, fences were repaired and strengthened, and the garden began to yield vegetables that would feed them through the coming months. The neighbors, who had initially been curious or skeptical, started to see that Nahel was more than just a captive. She was intelligent, capable, and helpful. Slowly, their whispers of doubt turned into quiet respect. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low, Nahel and Ethan encountered a challenge. A small group of wild cattle had broken through a weakened fence and were heading toward the neighbor's property. Without hesitation, Nahel sprang into action. She guided the cows carefully, using knowledge she had learned from watching Ethan and from her own instincts. Her movements were precise, calm, and confident. Ethan assisted her, and together they managed to lead the animals back safely. Afterward, Ethan looked at her with renewed admiration. "You are learning fast," he said. "And you have instincts I could never have expected." Nahel felt a sense of pride, not in showing off, but in proving to herself that she could survive, contribute, and belong. She was no longer simply a captive or a visitor in this land. She was part of it, part of the ranch, and beginning to feel the freedom she had longed for. That night, as they sat by the fire in the small cabin, they shared stories of the past and dreams of the future. Nahel spoke of her village, the festivals, and the songs that had comforted her. Ethan shared tales of the plains, of storms and long cattle drives, and of the importance of honor in a world that often ignored it. They laughed quietly at small mistakes and missteps, and slowly the walls between them began to fade. For Nahel, trust was growing, but it remained cautious. She had learned that freedom came with responsibility, and that relationships required patience. For Ethan, respect and admiration deepened. He saw that Nahel was not just brave or beautiful, but wise, kind, and capable of shaping her own life. By the end of the week, life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm. They worked together, faced challenges, and shared moments of quiet reflection. Nahel felt that she was beginning to belong, not because someone had given her a place, but because she was earning it through her own actions and choices. And though the future remained uncertain, both Ethan and Nahel understood one truth clearly. Freedom was more than escaping captivity. It was learning to live, to contribute, to trust, and to hope. Together they faced the days ahead with cautious optimism. Each sunrise was a chance to grow, each challenge a test of resilience, and each moment a step toward a life shaped by choice, courage, and respect. Nahel, once a captive, was learning what it meant to be truly free, and Ethan, by standing beside her, was discovering the power of compassion, integrity, and partnership. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, but it was far from quiet. Each day brought new work, new challenges, and small victories that reminded both Ethan and Nahale of the strength they carried. Nahale had begun to feel a sense of belonging, but the outside world did not always share that understanding. Some neighbors still whispered about the Apache woman living on the ranch. Their curiosity was sometimes thinly veiled, and at other times their suspicion was sharp. People in the town were slow to accept differences, and a woman who had once been a captive stirred emotions that ranged from pity to envy to distrust. Despite this, Nahale refused to let gossip affect her. She had learned long ago that life could not be dictated by what others thought. Her focus remained on learning the ways of the ranch, caring for the animals, and understanding the land. She worked hard, gaining Ethan's quiet admiration. He watched as she adapted to tasks he had assumed would take her weeks to learn. Her hands moved with skill, her eyes caught details others missed, and her mind absorbed lessons quickly. She was resourceful, patient, and brave, all traits that had kept her alive before, and now they helped her thrive. One morning, Ethan asked her to help with the horses. Several had been restless the night before, and a few had minor cuts that needed tending. Nahale had never worked with horses, but she remembered observing Ethan and the cowboys before. She approached them calmly, speaking in soft tones to soothe the nervous animals. She cleaned wounds carefully, applied ointments, and adjusted saddles with precision. Ethan moved beside her, guiding her hands when needed, but mostly allowing her to take the lead. He recognized that she had a natural way with animals that he had rarely seen in others. As the day went on, word of her skills began to spread to neighboring ranches. A few curious neighbors rode by pretending to inspect their own lands, but secretly watching Nahale work. Some were impressed, others skeptical, and a few were openly jealous. It was the reality of frontier life. Skills earned respect faster than words. Nahale did not seek their approval, but she did not hide from it either. She knew that demonstrating competence was the strongest response to doubt. The challenges of the ranch were not limited to animals. The land itself could be unforgiving. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept across the plains. Dark clouds rolled in, wind howled, and the first drops of rain turned quickly into a heavy downpour. Ethan and Nahale raced to secure the animals and gather supplies. The wind bent the trees, and the rain stung their faces. They worked side by side, shouting instructions to one another above the roar of the storm. Nahale proved fearless in the chaos. She helped guide the horses into the barn, sheltered the smaller animals, and tied down loose equipment. Ethan noticed how she stayed calm, thinking clearly under pressure. Her courage was not reckless. It was deliberate, honed by experiences that had demanded survival in dangerous situations. By the time the storm passed, the ranch had suffered little damage, and both of them were drenched and exhausted. That night, sitting by the fire inside the cabin, they laughed quietly at the chaos they had endured. It was a shared triumph, a reminder that they could face difficulties together. Nahale began to feel that she could trust Ethan more fully. He did not treat her as fragile or incapable. He treated her as an equal, someone whose abilities and opinions mattered. Trust, she realized, was a form of freedom as powerful as physical release from chains. As weeks turned into months, Nahale's place on the ranch became more secure. She helped Ethan repair fences, plant crops, and tend to the livestock. She learned to milk cows, mend broken tools, and even track signs of wild animals that might threaten the property. Each day brought new lessons and new challenges. She often reflected on her past, remembering the hardships she had endured, and she drew strength from them. Survival had taught her patience, resilience, and observation, all of which she now applied to a life of choice rather than captivity. But life on the ranch was not without social challenges. Some townsfolk continued to whisper when she passed through the market or rode near the settlement. A few questioned Ethan's decisions, wondering why he would allow an Apache woman to live freely on his property. Others were openly critical, claiming that it would bring trouble or disrespect to the community. Ethan faced these opinions quietly but firmly. "She is not a threat," he would tell them. "She is a person, just like anyone else. Treat her with respect, or say nothing at all." Nahel, for her part, ignored most of the gossip. She had faced far worse, and whispers did not define her worth. She focused on the work, on learning, and on becoming someone who could stand confidently in the world, free from fear or shame. She realized that acceptance would come slowly, but that did not matter as long as she had the freedom to live her life. One afternoon, a small accident tested both of them. A young calf had fallen into a shallow ditch, frightened and unable to climb out. Ethan and Nahel rushed to help, but the ground was muddy and slippery. They worked together, using ropes and teamwork to lift the calf safely. Their hands slipped, their clothes smeared with mud, but neither gave up. When the calf was finally safe, Nahel laughed despite the exhaustion. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. A reminder that life could be hard, yet rewarding when faced together. Ethan looked at her, feeling admiration deepen. "You have a way with them," he said, nodding toward the calf. "You think clearly, act decisively, and stay calm. That is rare." Nahel smiled faintly. "I have learned from survival," she said. "It teaches you to act, not panic." Their bond grew not just from shared work, but also from quiet moments together. At night, they would sit under the wide sky, looking at stars that seemed brighter in the open plains. Nahel shared stories of her village, songs, festivals, and traditions she remembered. Ethan told her of his own family, of cattle drives, storms, and the lessons he had learned in a life full of responsibility. These conversations built trust and understanding. They laughed at small mistakes, shared dreams for the future, and quietly began to rely on each other as friends and companions in a challenging world. One day, a group of travelers came near the ranch. They were looking for water and shelter for their horses. Nahel observed them cautiously, noticing the way they moved, their clothing, and their expressions. Ethan greeted them, and she followed his example. Her instincts and careful observations proved invaluable. She suggested ways to guide the horses safely and offered practical advice on where to rest. The travelers noticed her skill and intelligence, and Ethan felt a sense of pride in her growing confidence. As the seasons changed, the ranch thrived. Crops grew strong, livestock were healthy, and the land showed signs of careful management. Naheli's role was no longer simply that of a helper. She was an integral part of the ranch's success. Her contributions earned quiet respect from neighbors and visitors alike. She had transformed from a captive, uncertain and fearful, into a capable, confident woman who could face challenges with courage and wisdom. Yet, life was not without emotional challenges. Naheli often thought of her family and the village she had lost. Some nights memories returned vividly, the laughter of children, the songs around the fire, the familiar sense of her home. She felt a pang of longing, but she also understood that the past, while a part of her, did not control her. She had survived, adapted, and found a place where she could live with dignity. Ethan, noticing her quiet moments of reflection, offered comfort without intrusion. He understood that trust and respect included allowing space for grief, memory, and thought. "The past is part of who we are," he said gently one evening, "but the choices we make now define the future." Nahel considered his words carefully. She realized that freedom was more than leaving captivity. It was having the ability to choose, to act, and to build a life that honored both her past and her present. She was learning that courage was not only surviving hardship, but also embracing opportunity, forming connections, and trusting carefully chosen allies. By the end of the year, the ranch had weathered storms, attacks from wild animals, and the occasional misunderstanding with neighbors. Nahel had proven herself as skilled, intelligent, and courageous. Her relationship with Ethan had grown into a strong bond based on trust, respect, and quiet admiration. They had faced challenges together and had learned to rely on one another not out of necessity, but out of shared purpose and understanding. Nahel's journey from captivity to freedom was not only a transformation of circumstance, but also a transformation of self. She had learned to navigate a new world, to contribute meaningfully, and to trust a person who had shown integrity and kindness. For Ethan, the experience had been equally transformative. He had learned the value of compassion, the importance of acting with honor, and the power of trust earned through action rather than obligation. Their story was no longer only about survival. It was about life, hope, and the courage to face challenges together. Each day was a new opportunity to build, to learn, and to grow. Nahale, once a captive, was now a free woman with purpose, skill, and respect. And Ethan, by standing beside her, had become a partner in her journey, sharing in the triumphs and hardships of life on the frontier. The years passed on the ranch, and life settled into a rhythm of work, care, and quiet reflection. Nahale had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident with each passing season. Her hands were skilled in tending animals, mending fences, and nurturing the crops that fed the ranch. Her eyes, once wary of strangers, now observed the world with calm awareness and quiet authority. She had transformed from a captive into a woman who belonged, not only to the land but to her own choices. Ethan noticed these changes with admiration and deep respect. He had always known she was capable, but watching her grow, adapt, and thrive was a source of constant inspiration. He often found himself quietly observing her, marveling at the way she approached every task with precision, patience, and intelligence. The bond between them had evolved into something profound, not romance, though the seeds of trust and care were strong, but a deep partnership rooted in mutual respect and shared experience. The ranch itself reflected their efforts. The fences were strong, the fields fertile, and the animals healthy. Even the neighbors, who had once whispered doubts and questioned Ethan's choices, began to notice the difference Nahale had made. Her intelligence and skill became apparent in the small successes that spoke louder than words. She was no longer the Apache woman, the captive brought by chance. She was a person of value whose contributions were recognized and respected. One afternoon, news arrived that a traveling merchant would be coming to town with a caravan of goods. The market had always been a place of curiosity and tension for Nahale, but this time she approached it differently. She walked with confidence beside Ethan, carrying a basket of produce from the ranch to trade. For the first time she felt fully accepted, not simply tolerated but respected for her skills and knowledge. At the market, some townsfolk whispered quietly, still unsure, but their words lacked the sharpness of suspicion. Others approached cautiously, asking questions about the ranch, the crops, and the animals. Nahale answered with calm intelligence, sharing knowledge that impressed even those who had once doubted her. Ethan watched, pleased, knowing that she had earned their respect not through privilege, but through competence, courage, and integrity. Later that day, as they returned to the ranch, a small group of travelers stopped at the gate. They were seeking help with a sick horse, unsure where to turn. Nahale immediately stepped forward, assessing the animal with careful attention. She cleaned its wound, gave it water, and helped the travelers guide it safely into a shaded area. Her calm demeanor reassured them, and her skillful handling of the situation earned their admiration. Ethan nodded silently, proud of her resourcefulness and kindness. The days continued in a steady rhythm of work and small triumphs. Draven changed, bringing their own challenges. Storms that tested the strength of the buildings, harsh winds that threatened the crops, and occasional predators that put the livestock at risk. Each time, Nahale and Ethan faced these trials together, learning from one another and relying on the bond they had cultivated. Trust, respect, and mutual understanding had become the foundation of their daily lives. As the months passed, Nahale began to feel the full meaning of freedom. It was no longer simply the absence of chains or captivity. It was the ability to make choices, to act with purpose, and to build a life that reflected her values and skills. She could walk freely across the land, speak her mind, and contribute meaningfully to the world around her. Freedom, she realized, was a living thing. It required courage, responsibility, and patience. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink over the plains, Nahale and Ethan sat together outside the cabin. The air was cool, and the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of birds, filled the quiet space between them. Nahale spoke softly of the past, of her family and village, and of the moments that had shaped her life. She did not speak with sadness or bitterness, but with reflection and understanding. "I have learned much," she said, her eyes on the horizon. "About survival, about trust, and about the choices we make. Freedom is not just leaving captivity, it is learning to live fully and to face life with courage." Ethan listened, feeling the weight and wisdom in her words. "You have taught me much as well," he said. "About resilience, about hope, and about the strength that comes from doing what is right, even when it is difficult." Their shared experiences had created a bond deeper than words could capture. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and the judgment of others. They had worked side by side through storms, accidents, and challenges that tested their courage and skill. Through it all, they had learned to trust each other, respect each other, and rely on one another. The ranch, once a place of simple work, had become a symbol of resilience and growth. Nahal's presence had transformed it, not only through her labor, but through her spirit. She had brought strength, intelligence, and determination, and in doing so she had earned a place of honor and respect in a world that had once sought to deny her both. Neighbors who had once doubted or whispered now approached with quiet acknowledgement. They sought advice, assistance, and sometimes simply conversation. Nahal responded with patience and humility, never boasting, but always sharing knowledge that reflected her skill and experience. The initial suspicion of the townsfolk had shifted into respect, demonstrating that courage, competence, and integrity could overcome prejudice and fear. One afternoon, a group of children from the town wandered near the ranch, curious about the Apache woman they had heard about. Nahal greeted them warmly, showing them how to care for small animals, plant seeds, and understand the land. She taught them with patience, encouraging curiosity and observation. The children left with new skills and respect, carrying stories of kindness and knowledge that would spread through the town. Through these experiences, Nahal realized that freedom also meant responsibility. It was not enough to survive and work. It was important to contribute, to educate, and to inspire others. She had once been at the mercy of the world, but now she could shape it, help others, and create a legacy built on courage, wisdom, and compassion. Ethan and Nahal also faced personal challenges during this time. They encountered raiders on the outskirts of the plains, harsh weather that threatened crops, and occasional illness among the animals. Each time they relied on one another, combining knowledge, skill, and intuition to overcome obstacles. Their partnership was a testament to the strength that comes from respect and trust, and each challenge they overcame deepened their bond. One late autumn evening, as frost began to coat the ground, Ethan and Nahal stood on a small hill overlooking the ranch. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with deep reds and purples. The animals were settled, the fences strong, and the land secure. Nahal felt a profound sense of peace. It was no longer defined by her past, no longer a captive, and no longer dependent on others for validation. She was free, truly free, and capable of shaping her own destiny. "Look at how far we've come," Ethan said quietly, his arm resting lightly on her shoulder. Nahal smiled, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "It is not just the ranch," she said. "It is us, what we have built together. Freedom is more than this land. It is the life we have chosen, the respect we have earned, and the courage to face whatever comes next." In that moment, the past felt distant, like a shadow that could not reach her anymore. She had survived captivity, adapted to a new world, and learned the meaning of trust, courage, and partnership. Her future was no longer uncertain. It was filled with possibilities, guided by her choices and strengthened by the bond she shared with Ethan. The town began to accept her fully, not as a novelty or curiosity, but as a valued member of the community. People sought her advice, welcomed her presence, and respected her knowledge and skill. The whispers of doubt and suspicion faded over time, replaced by acknowledgement and quiet admiration. Nahal had earned not only freedom but also dignity, respect, and a place in a world that had once tried to limit her. Ethan and Nahal continued their life on the ranch, facing challenges, celebrating victories, and learning from every experience. Their partnership was steady, built on shared responsibility and mutual respect. Together, they demonstrated that courage, integrity, and compassion could overcome hardship, prejudice, and fear. One spring morning, as flowers bloomed across the plains and the ranch came alive with color, Nahale walked freely across the land. She tended the crops, guided the animals, and moved with confidence and purpose. She was no longer defined by captivity, but by her actions, choices, and strength. Freedom had been earned, nurtured, and lived fully. Ethan watched her from the porch, quietly proud. He had not only helped her gain freedom, but he had witnessed her transformation. A journey from fear to courage, from captivity to respect, from survival to thriving. Together, they had created a life built on trust, skill, and dignity. As the sun set over the plains that evening, Nahale and Ethan stood side by side, watching the horizon. The world was vast and full of challenges, but it was also full of possibility. Nahale, once a captive, now walked freely with pride and purpose. Ethan, standing beside her, knew that he had made the right choice in acting with honor, compassion, and courage. Their story, born from a moment in a dusty market, had grown into a life of hope, freedom, and resilience. It was a story not only of survival but of humanity, the power of trust, respect, and determination to transform lives. Together they had faced the harsh realities of the world and had chosen a path defined by choice, courage, and compassion. And under the endless western sky, with the ranch secure and the land stretching out before them, they knew one truth clearly. Freedom was not simply the absence of chains. It was the ability to live, to grow, to contribute, and to face the future with courage and hope.